Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us on our second episode of our Bike Talk series. Really excited to have you all here. If you're sitting at home all by yourself, you are actually in a party of somewhere between 50 and 60 people that are joining from all over California, and we had the same last week. So welcome, everybody. Tonight, I have three superstars that I'm super excited to introduce. But first, we're going to show you a brief little video of how our community of challenged athletes are dealing with this bizarre time that we find ourselves in. So here's a short little clip that'll show you how they are handling it.
Yeah.
And we're stuck. The coronavirus is really taking a huge toll on everyone, especially people with disabilities.
When I found out about the Paralympics being postponed until 2021, I felt devastated right away. But CAF has really helped.
I was so excited to hear from the Challenge Athletes Foundation that I received a grant for some training, which is going to be so helpful once I'm able to get active and back at the barn.
This grant was truly a ray of sunshine in an otherwise dark time.
I'm smiling because I received my first CAF grant to travel all over the world.
I would just like to take a moment and thank the Challenge Athletes Foundation and their donors for me to get a new basketball wheelchair.
They're giving everybody that I care about and I know help.
I'm so excited to get running legs.
Thank you, CAF, for supporting me in my dreams.
I cannot wait until we beat this pandemic together.
All right, well, we had a little sound problem, but I hope you all enjoyed it and felt inspired to see how our challenged athletes are continuing to do the best they can. So tonight we have three guests. I'm extremely excited to introduce all three. First up, we have Chris Carmichael. You are legendary in your own way, so I'm not sure you need a lot of introduction here tonight, but you've written 8 books, one of which is The Time-Crunched Cyclist. I'm halfway through it and I'm loving it, so thank you. You've participated in the Olympics, you've ridden in Tour de France, you have training centers in 4 different states, but most famous of your endeavors is probably being Lance Armstrong's coach, so lots of exciting stuff there. Second up, we have Mike McCormack, famous in his very own way, won the Ironman Canada twice, has his own spin studio in San Francisco, M2 Spin Revolution. And when I think of you, Michael, we've had some fun building the NorCal cycling club in the last few years. It's been great partnering with you. And I took a little poll around your peers to sort of say, how should we get back at him after all your sarcastic humor in the last few years? And I'm going to take the high road here.
Okay.
But when I think of you, I think of heart and humor, and it's really been fun to build a cycling club with you, and I look forward to a lot more growth. And to moderate our talk tonight, we have the very famous Bob Babbitt, Babbittville Radio. Bob, we're super excited to have you here. You're famous in your own way, but how I know you is you are the co-founder of the Challenged Athlete Foundation 26 years ago, and I'm forever grateful for that. So I'll leave it to you to take us on a fun journey with these gentlemen, and I'll see you at the tail end of it.
Thank you, Lana. I appreciate that. In that video you guys just saw, that was for our grants that just went out, the 2020 grants. We sent out 3,921 grants totaling $5.9 million to athletes in all 50 states and Puerto Rico and 42 countries in 103 different sports. I didn't know there were 103 different sports, but we give out grants and all that for equipment, training, travel. I've been lucky to go back a lot of years with both Chris and with Michael. And Chris, first of all, what got you into cycling to begin with?
I started bike racing in 1969. I was 9 years old, And
Breaking Away.
What's that?
Was it the movie Breaking Away?
It was way before that. I grew up in South Florida, and I started riding with the Cuban Bicycle Club, and cycling was really popular in Cuba. And there would be kids out there. It would be, you know, on a Tuesday and Thursday session. There'd be 20 or 30 kids out there in that age group of 10 to 12 years old. So I was really fortunate that I grew up with this really strong infrastructure of cycling. And in the early 70s, there weren't many places in the country that cycling was even, you know, like Des Moines, Iowa, being bikers would have been pretty tough, you know. So I was really fortunate. I grew up in South Florida with this strong infrastructure of cycling, primarily driven by the Cuban population. So I just love cycling. You know, it was. I think most people start cycling because it's freedom. You know, when you're a kid, you don't have to rely upon your parents to drive you anywhere, and I would just go out and ride. And I did a race, and I got third, and I got a trophy. And I remember, you know, a trophy when you're a kid, you're stuck. That's it.
I love it. And so, Michael, what got you into, were you in endurance sports when you were younger?
I was pretty much every sport except gymnastics. But I do remember in 1978 seeing a small article in the back of Sports Illustrated about this crazy thing called Ironman. And I was immediately drawn to the concept of the ultimate physical challenge. And I kind of made note of that and said, you know, someday I'm going to go and do that. So anyway, I went to college, graduated, went to work at IBM, and I decided that was the time to begin my dabbling in triathlon. And that dabbling became something a lot more serious, to the point where I had a little refrain that I would say to my friends regarding IBM. I said I'd put my 40 hours in every month because the rest of the time I was out training, and kind of had a unique opportunity land in my lap. I was in Spain on vacation and jumped in a couple of triathlons there, which I won, and caught the attention of a guy that was plugged into the pro cycling world there. He owned a bike shop, and a lot of the Spanish pros from the Madrid area he had supported in their youth. And he said, you know, if you're serious about leaving IBM and pursuing this, you ought to move to Spain, and I'll plug you into the pro cycling world here. And I was living in Boston at the time. There weren't many pro cyclists in Boston in December and January, as you might imagine.
Or triathletes.
Or anything for that matter. San Diego was kind of the mecca, but I'd always been drawn to Spain, loved the country, and it was a pretty unique opportunity. So I took him up on it. And when I say plugged into the pro cycling world on a training basis initially, and Chris might know some of the riders, but I didn't know who these guys were. All I knew is they had jerseys with names on them that I didn't recognize. And it was Tuesday afternoon, and I was not in a suit. I was in the plains of Spain riding with these cool guys. Chris, a couple names: Anselmo Fuerte. He was third in the Vuelta in '88.
Vuelta, yeah.
And kind of a funny little anecdote. One of the early rides, I'm riding side by side, because you always rode in pairs in a train. And mind you, I was fresh out of an IBM suit. I had no right being there, but I was. And so hey, how was your season? I asked him, and he said, well, Kelly got past me in the time trial on the second to last day. And I'm like, oh, that must have hurt. And he goes, but I was second in L'Alpe d'Huez. And I didn't know what L'Alpe d'Huez at the time, but he said it with such conviction that I said, oh, that's really good. And Eduardo Chothas was another guy, sixth in the tour and stayed. So, but ignorance is bliss. It was Tuesday, and I was in Spain, not at work, having fun. So that was the beginning of a really interesting journey. Yeah.
And Chris, when we talk about the early days of cycling, back then, there was there was U.S. cyclists, but really the U.S. cyclists, except for like Jack Boyer, people didn't race over in Europe. I think then Le Mans was the next guy to go to Europe. But for Americans, when you guys put together 7-Eleven in the early, in the 80s, with yourself and Davis Finney and Roy Nickman and Kiefel and all those guys, and went to Europe for the first time, what type of shell shock was that for you and the rest of the guys?
Yeah, we had no idea what we were doing. We were just we were the bad news bears. We were, you know, I sometimes think back on it, and we were, you know, just lost. And it was funny because there was a race, the opening race on the Italian calendar in February. It's called Trofeo Lagueglia, and it's a one-day race, and kind of kicks off the racing season in Italy. And we had raced the Tour of the Mediterranean, which is like a 5-day race in southern France, and then we were going to do this Trofeo Lagueglia, and we basically got our butts kicked in Tour de Med, and we were probably the last. There were about 6 of us on the team, and we were probably filled the last 6 places on the GC. we were horrible, and we went to do this race in Italy. At that time, Francisco Moser was like God, and he was kind of an interesting guy, you know. I mean, he looked on a bike perfect. He was beautiful, you know. I mean, how he rode his bike, the perfect Italian pro. The hat just pierced on top of his head, no helmet. You know,
nobody wore helmets. Oh yeah.
Yeah, no helmets, and you know, if he could be going 40 miles an hour downhill and that hat wouldn't move, you know, and just perfect. And he had he had done really well early in his career, but in the middle part, he kind of slumped a little bit and really didn't live up to the reputation of the tifosi, or the Italian fans. And then right at the end of his career, he came back and won the Milan-San Remo, won the Tour of Italy, and set the hour record. And this was the last year he was racing. It was 1985. And I remember we started this race, and I had gotten this this chest cold, you know, and this bronchitis thing, and I was, you know, blowing all these huge snot rockets out of my nose, and we're riding along, and the race starts kind of slow in Italy, and everybody's chit chatting, and you know, I feel one coming from deep in my lungs, and so I, you know, blow this thing out, and it lands on Moser's thigh and wraps nearly halfway around his thigh. And it was like, oh my gosh. And he looked at it, he looked at me, and he was like, who are you? Why are you even in this race, you know? And it took like 30 seconds before he started yelling at me. And I mean, I was so embarrassed. I think I tried to wipe it off and everything. But we had a plan. An interesting thing is the plan was at the end, it finished up this like 4 or 5K climb to this town. And we were going to line it up for our teammate, Ron Kiefel. We all had nicknames. His nickname was Wookie.
Wookie, yeah.
He was kind of a big gangly guy, and it was during the Star Wars kind of era. And we would drop Wookie with like a K to go, and he'd take off, and and he'd win. That's what we said, you know, the night before when we had our team meeting. We'll drop Wookie a K to go. He'll do his Wookie sprint and he'll win. So we basically lined it up, did all that, dropped him 1K to go. He took off and he won. And it was really kind of remarkable. And he came across the line, and there was this blank space underneath 7-Eleven, and this Senor DeLoglio, who owned Hoonved, saw that on TV, and he contacted our director, Jim Okowitz, and said he wanted to sponsor the team for the Tour of Italy. And so at that point, we were okay.
So basically, you guys are the Bad News Bears, and here you are doing, okay, we'll just have, we'll lead out Wookie will win the race, and exactly what happened. And when did you guys start feeling that you were getting some respect from the Euros?
It took a while. I mean, even after that, every crash, when we went to the Giro later that year, every crash, we could be nowhere near it, and they would blame it on us, you know, the Americans, and we were the ones who were crashing everybody. And we're like, what do you mean? You know, we don't even, we're just trying to stay out of everybody's way. And it took a while. And, you know, I think back to that first Giro, and, you know, we won 2 stages. Ron Kiefel won a stage, and Andy Hampston won a summit finish. And, and, you know, 3 years later, he won the whole Tour of Italy. So, you know, it took a little while, but after the Giro, we were okay. You know, we were sort of accepted.
So, Michael, I remember you winning Ironman Canada 91, 95. Did you surprise yourself? Because I think back then, people would have been thinking Scott Tinley, Scott Molina, you know, some of the bigger names are going to win, because there wasn't 100 Ironmans back then.
Right.
There was Canada, there was New Zealand, there was Kona, and I don't even know if there was Australia or Japan. Japan, I think, started around that time, but there weren't a lot of them. And winning a race like that, how did that change your trajectory in the sport?
Well, it was quite a thrill. You know, I just that was year 3 of kind of my triathlon adventure, my odyssey, having moved to Madrid, Spain, and then kind of a promising first year, 1989 in Hawaii, which is actually where I first crossed paths with Jim McLaren. Finishing the marathon, probably had about 8 miles to go, and it's an out and back course, and kind of the woe is me type stage. And in the distance, I see this tall figure kind of striding towards me very purposefully, and just really moving at a decent clip. And I'm like, who the hell is this? And then as he got closer, I realized that he had a prosthetic leg. And this is 1989.
It was a walking leg, not like a
prosthetic legs were not then what they are now. Not that, you know, it's an easy thing. I don't mean to say that, but and I remember it kind of snapped me out of my self-pity stage.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I kind of had renewed energy, kind of like magically. And I must say that was a tool that I used ever since then. You know, it's like, wow, that moment, how I thought I was out of it and dead. And, but somehow some kind of a moment like that kind of changed everything for me. That was 89. And then I ended up, I was as high as 16th in that race. Mike Pigg, as you remember, big superstar right in front of me.
Yep.
And then I just kind of ran out of gas. But I went sub-9 first year, not bad.
You took 11th there one year too.
I was, but I don't want to, but my father said, you know, the first thing, you know, 89 was also famous. That was the year that, you know, Dave Scott and Mark Allen. So I kind of witnessed that firsthand. And I didn't realize I said it, but my father said to me afterwards at the finish, he says, you know what the first thing you said to me was? And I said no. And he goes, I can beat everybody here except maybe those 2 guys. And that turned out
bobblehead, baby. That bobblehead's right here.
That turned out to be prophetic. Almost got Dave Scott. Well, anyway, but so 91 was Tinley, Molina, Bustos, the whole gang was there, and it was just one of those days where I was on fire. And I got off the bike, down 2 minutes to Tinley. And I didn't want to be a footnote in that race where, hey, a relative newcomer, Michael McCormack, raced well, second, whatever. I figured I wanted to be the headline. And and that's what I set out to do. So
I know both you guys you have made your careers as great coaches. as well, obviously, as great athletes, but as great coaches and innovative coaches. And for you, Michael, I remember, and you guys, you learned from your own experiences.
Right.
And I sort of remember something with an escalator back in the day.
You know, it's probably not in Chris's book, is my guess, but or any book. But so about a month out.
Chris, by the way. Yeah.
Pardon me?
Chris will like this. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I want to hear the story.
So it was about a month out of Canada, and I just had a nagging Achilles tendon injury that I just couldn't lick, and it was shutting me down. And I knew that I was in great shape. It was actually 6 weeks out.
Yeah.
And I was okay. It was the impact part of the run that would cause me problems. Going up was not a problem, but I couldn't run. And so much fitness, you don't want to have it go to waste. Like the year that you're all dressed up for the Vuelta, Chris, and turns out you weren't able to do it. So what I did do is the subways there, there's certain stations that were dug very deep, and the escalators would move very quickly, and they had big steps. So I bought a 40-pound weight vest. This is in Madrid, Spain. There's not exactly a fitness superstore, but I did manage to get a 40-pound vest. And then what I did is I went deep into the bowels of the subway system where there weren't a lot of people, and I would just kind of walk in place on an escalator with a 40-pound weight vest for an hour. And when I say not a lot of people, it was funny. It was a very remote station, and the junkies would actually be there. So it was me training for an Ironman in an escalator with the junkies that knew no one would catch them there. And it worked. It worked. I was able to start running 3 weeks out. I really thought I was going to be shy on miles, and I might fade at the end of the marathon. I had one last run planned on a Tuesday, not before the race, the week before. I was in Boston at this time. Lo and behold, a hurricane blows through. So I couldn't do a longer bike ride, couldn't do the longer run, but I figured a safe place would be, I did a water run in Walden Pond for a 2-hour water run when the eye of the hurricane passed over. And anyway, different things, but when there's a need and a will and a way, I was open to trying anything. And so, I ended up running. The course was a little bit short, but extrapolated. I ran 2:44 that day, didn't get tired, and had the thrill of my life meeting Scott Tinley and introducing myself at the 10K mark.
When you went by him?
We chit-chatted a while. He was a very entertaining guy. He expressed concern about not knowing who I was. And I told him I enjoyed reading his articles, which I did, but I also knew that would probably be messing with his head a little bit. Who the hell is this guy reading my articles? And anyway, eventually I was able to finish the race. So it was a great time. Yeah.
So obviously so much of the training back then was by feel. You didn't have a lot of technology. Chris, what have you taken from back then that you use today with Carmichael training systems, and how have you adapted to power meters and all the different equipment that is out there?
Technology is, well, first of all, Michael, that is a great story.
Isn't that great? I knew you'd like that, Chris.
Tremendous, I love it. And it makes perfect sense, as you kind of think about it. It's like, that's awesome. So I'm gonna store that and use that at some point, with an athlete that we're working with when they start complaining about something. Let me tell you about this guy, Michael McCormack.
Find an escalator.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 40 pounds on your back. Technology has transformed sports like many industries, and but as it has, it really takes, I've been in the sport for a long time, and I've seen a lot, and it really takes what we knew before, but it was all experiential, and it's quantified it. Now we can measure it. Now we can repeat it, and we can, and we don't really wonder much anymore. And it's a double-edged sword, I mean, technology is, it's great when all the numbers are on your side and an athlete's going into a competition and they're, and they have all the data, you got all the data to support the fact that they should have a great performance. But when the numbers aren't on their side, that's the other side of it. You still have to compete. And, being a bike racer, there's so much that's involved with competition, and ultimately it just comes down. The failure point is always mental. What I always see, it's always mental at the highest level, all the way down. The failure point is always mental. And as much as technology has helped us a lot, we also always get to a point at the heart of competition where it's just who wants it bad enough, and who doesn't doubt what they're capable of, and they continue to go on. And so I think that's what makes sport, that's why we watch it, because that's where we see greatness. That's where we see that the things that we don't think are achievable become achievable, is somebody doesn't doubt that they can do it, and another person doubts and they fall to the side.
So Michael, same type of thing, situation where you come from, you're a racer, you're an Ironman champion, and taking what you learn from that to somebody who's works at home and has a family and has a business and trying to, they don't have the time to train all day. And you could sort of relate to that from your IBM days.
Sure. But
how do you take the technology from back then, technology now, and make someone efficient and get them to their goal?
Yeah. Well, I think I was always a big proponent of indoor training, and I kind of stumbled on that serendipitously also. Typically, I would leave and go to Spain in December. I was living in Boston, but I split time, Spain and Boston. And but I was running one of my last runs before getting on a plane to Spain, where you can train outdoors all year. And I slipped on some black ice and threw my back out. So I couldn't run again. And so I decided to stay in Boston that winter. And there's just no way you could ride outside. So I had a wind trainer, and I kind of recognized that I was going to be on that for the long haul. And so how could I go about devising a way to train on this without going insane, getting bored, but making meaningful improvement along the way? I never rode more than 80 or 90 minutes. I just didn't feel that was necessary. When I got to Madrid, I hooked up with a couple of guys. They would be Cat 1 riders here. And we did a 60, 70 mile ride, hilly terrain. Madrid's very challenging terrain. And I was just destroying these guys. My longest ride was 90 minutes. And so I'm like, wow, there's something to this, I think. But anyway, that's great. It wasn't wasted time. Now I can be banging out my 350, 400 miles, and I'm just going to be a monster. Well, a couple months later, after having done that, I was anything but a monster. I had none of the zip that I had when I got there, supposedly having done, substandard training. And it wasn't easy to figure out what had changed. I'd kind of left a structured, measured training environment, that being the indoors. I was pretty anal about how I approached these sessions. Straight block cassette and knowing exactly the cadence, the tire pressure, this interval length, heart rate, reaching this point, etc. So I went back to that. My Spanish friends thought I was nuts. Here I am in Spain in June, and once or twice a week, I'm still indoors I called it my laboratory. But fast forward, that was the year that I ran down Mr. Tinley and had the fastest bike split in the field. And they all went and bought wind trainers. So anyway.
That is great.
Another anecdote, if I may share. When I first got there in 81, winter of 88, 89. I showed up, and Chris, I'm sure you can appreciate this. Two things. I had a helmet on. What the hell are you wearing a helmet for? Was the question they would all ask. I didn't know how to answer that because I'm a dummy. Because I'm a dummy. And the other thing is I had the prototype, the D.H. Scott aero bars.
Oh, yeah.
So who the hell is this American guy with a helmet and these curvy whatever type handlebars? And
irrigation system. They thought it was an irrigation system.
They would just shake their head and just mutter about how the bike store owner, a guy named Eulogio, how did Eulogio let this guy into the group? And gradually they accepted me, and it was kind of fun. And I said, you wait, these handlebars are going to make it into pro cycling. And 89, of course, was the year that, Le Mans came back and beat Fignon on the very last day. And then they all went and got the handlebars. So anyway.
So Chris, when you went from being a professional racer to becoming a coach and starting Carmichael Training Systems, but you moved outside of coaching just endurance athletes pretty quickly. You were working with hockey players, I remember back in the day. And how did you adapt what you were doing for cyclists to other sports, not just straight endurance? Because hockey players are fast twitch type of guys.
Yeah. We focused on aerobic development, and the first hockey player we worked with, NHL hockey player was with the Canadians. He was Saku Koivu, and he was a Finnish guy. He was their captain. He got leukemia and cancer, and was struggling to try to come back. And I had worked with, obviously, Lance through his cancer phase. And so the owner of the Canadians, American guy, George Gillette, called me up and asked me if I would help, if thought I could help Saku. And I said, well, I don't really know, but I went up to Montreal, and a lot of them were using bikes, indoor bikes, for a good part of their training. And when you really break it down, they're on the ice for not very long at a stretch, but it's repeated efforts on and off, and it's really hockey. And because of all the different muscle movement, their VO2 max is actually fairly high, and oxygen consumption in the delivery of that oxygen is important for them. And so we designed a workout that would, on the bike, that would improve their VO2 max. And it worked for Saku. And then we got a contract with the Edmonton Oilers. And actually before that, it was the Toronto Maple Leafs. And we worked with the Maple Leafs. And as an average, their VO2 for the team went up 5 points, which is pretty huge. Massive, and they still didn't play very well, and
but they were fast.
But they're so loved, they're kind of like they're just a kind of the beloved team of Canadian hockey. Yeah. And then we moved to the Edmonton Oilers and did some work with them, but that's kind of the backstory on working with hockey players.
Now, I know both of you have been involved with CAF for a number of years. Chris, I think you did $1 Million Challenge, 4 or 5 times. Yep. And Michael, you're coaching the NorCal Cycling Club and been working with CAF for forever and ever. Talk a little bit about your connection to CAF, and just because on those rides, it isn't just able-bodied guys out there riding. You'll have people on a hand cycle and amputees out there and visually impaired athletes. When you were first exposed to that, what were your thoughts?
Well, my first thought was, as I described before, it was pre-CAF actually, but
McLaren.
Seeing McLaren, yeah, who's the original CAF athlete actually, and I still get goosebumps every time I think about it. I really do, and I've shared that story with my kids who are aspiring athletes as well. And I met Jim actually several years later. I was in Boulder, Colorado for a a training stint. And we met in a changing room in a swimming pool, of course, a master's program. And I shared what I experienced with him. And he's a very, very kind of interesting guy, to say the least. And then we do weekly rides. Well, right now we're not, but here we're developing a very nice community here in the Bay Area. And oftentimes some of the athletes come and join us. And, two things. It's kind of nice seeing them out there, but it's a little bit humbling also, because these guys are very strong. You have Muhammad. Yeah. Have you ridden with Muhammad, Chris? I don't know if you have, perhaps, but he rides with pedals with one leg.
Yes.
So he'll attack a hill standing, pedaling with one leg, which is pretty extraordinary. I don't know that, well, if you had power cranks, maybe you could actually try that, but I think we would all find that be a challenge. And then Andre, who you can see right here, just incredibly strong. I remember descending Highway 1 down in Montero, which is a really, really fast descent. And a longtime friend and athlete of mine, Matt Barger, who's very good descending. You might know Matt, USA Cycling, Chris. And I watched Andre just go by him in his wheelchair at like 45 miles an hour. So pretty inspiring, to say the least. And then the MDC ride, which I think many of my folks are going to do this year. We were supposed to be in Spain in June for a trip, but I think I'm going to migrate them to the MDC Challenge in October. It's I know it sounds cliche, but riding for a cause, there really is something to that. And there's a lot of causes to be celebrated in that event. It's one of those type things that makes you feel positive about the world. It's so many good people doing so many good things for others. And the community that surrounds that is just very, very inspiring. And Bob, you're one of the original founders, so what an accomplishment. Yeah, so I am very proud to be a part of it, and I thank Lotta for that also.
Love it. And Chris, for you?
Yeah, I am really fortunate to have participated in the MDC. I was a guest of our friend Bill Walton, and the first time I did it, I was just awed by the athletes out there, and the things that the disabilities that they've overcome, and they're really, it's hard to even necessarily say they're disabilities, and because they make it feels like it's not. When you're riding with them, it just feels like this person this is just an athlete who's hitting it as hard as anybody else. And it's really inspiring, and it allows you, what it does for me is it helps me be grateful, and I think if living a grateful life is an important way, because we all have challenges, we all have things that we have to overcome, and to be able to see what these athletes overcome inspires and allows us to believe that anything's really possible. And so it's something I carry with me all the time still.
So our first question from our viewers, this is for both of you guys, how did you guys decide to become coaches, to move from the racing side to the coaching side?
Actually, I started, I never thought that it's not something that I planned out, but in Spain, people were aware of kind of how meticulous I was in preparing and being willing to kind of think outside of the box, if you will. And then having results that supported that helped as well. So various people approached me and asked me if I'd be interested in training them. And I discovered along the way that it was something that I really enjoyed. Yeah, and that I was also good at too. So I really enjoy it quite a bit. Yeah. So,
Chris?
Yeah, I broke my femur really bad, and I did it right as I renewed my contract with the 7-Eleven team. So I was really fortunate, and the team at that time provided health insurance, and I'm really grateful for that, because I would have been financially crippled at 23 years old with this broken leg, and I had to have surgery and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, I continued to race 4 more years professionally, but I never really got back all the way, and my contract eventually wasn't renewed, and I never, I started bike racing, and I knew that's what I was going to do, and I never thought it would stop, and here I was, 30 years old, and I was like, what do you mean I don't have a contract? And I couldn't, and no other teams were signing me, and I really didn't know what I was going to do. And I remember calling my dad. I was talking to him, and he really, cycling wasn't his thing, but he said, listen, son, I don't know, but you sure feels like you have a PhD in bike racing. You've been doing it for a long time. And I got a call from the US Cycling Federation at the time, as it was called. And they wanted to know if I wanted to work some development camps. Young riders coming up, guys that were coming from the junior ranks that were on like the junior national team and going to move into like the national B team if I'd come out there and help coach some of these camps in Colorado Springs. And my dad said he thought it made sense. He said, you need to work with a larger organization. And I never saw myself necessarily doing that. When I got out there and started working with these athletes, I really enjoyed it. I felt like I could articulate to them what needed to be done. And there was this, this incredible pool of really young, very talented athletes coming up, and it just felt like my calling, and I feel like I'm a better coach than I was an athlete, and so I'm very fortunate that I got into coaching.
My favorite coaching story of you, Chris, was I think you were in Russia, and you had a young kid on the team named Lance, and you told him, sit in. And every lap he was off the front, basically giving you hook 'em horns every time he came by. He was a pretty willful kid, but you could see greatness in him then.
Yeah. I mean, we all could, look, Lance Armstrong I heard the stories at like 16, he went out and did a triathlon, and
4th overall at racing when he was 15 years old. Yep, against Dave Scott and Mark Allen and those guys.
Yeah, we all knew he was gifted, and I was from the era, my cycling era. I was on the junior world's team, national team with Greg LeMond, and through that era. And Greg was similar, very.
Absolutely.
We would come back from training rides with Eddie B, the national coach, and we'd all be trashed, and Eddie would take Greg out for another 2 hours of motor pacing, so a similar thing. Yeah.
Love it. We have another question from Larry Davidson for both of you guys. Both have very similar protocols and methods, but you both influenced me greatly. What's your next epic adventure, fully knowing that COVID is messing with all of us? Or probably MDC.
And I also saw a question down below. Can I get Matt Barger to do the MDC?
Yes. That was yeah.
Well, just a quick aside, Matt's getting old, and I think it's too hard for him. So it's a little inside here, Bob, Matt. Excuse me, Bob. You'll know what I'm working at. But So Matt, if you're listening, way too hard for you. Okay.
I couldn't handle it, I bet.
Don't sign up. Okay.
Yeah.
There's, the accommodations are too nice. The food's too good. The atmosphere is inspiring. But you actually have to ride a bike to do it. Okay. So we were supposed to go to Spain in June, and it was an 8-day trip. And it's kind of become our epic events, these trips to Europe. We try to work in a couple of signature climb days. We were going to do Los Machucos. I don't know if this you saw that in the Vuelta the last couple of years, Chris. The Lagos de Covadonga. Last year we did the Pyrenees, Laro. We did Stelvio and Gavia, Mortirolo, and so I don't know. The COVID thing is really throwing. Who knows? I mean, who knows? But you got to have goals. You got to dream big, and I think putting challenging things out there that add reason and purpose to your day to day, I think are important for keeping you alive. And I think a good number of us are going to be at MDC this year. I know I'm going to be.
Good.
And so we'll see as the world turns. But certainly October, things hopefully will have calmed down, and I'll see you in La Jolla Shores Park there and in October. Yeah.
I love that. And Chris, you'll have to put a group together this year. That'd be fun. Have both your group and Michael's group.
That'd be good. That'd be good.
Like
yeah.
Michael, we have another, David Schwartz is asking about your particular approach to training for big events.
David Schwartz is asking that. Hi.
Yes.
Big events. I don't know.
He says it's quite different from what a lot of other practitioners do.
Well, David and I have a very nice community of folks that train with me indoors in San Francisco a couple times a week. And it's a very nice community, and they're Cyclops indoor cycles or CompuTrainers. So it's power-based, wattage-based training. Mm-hmm. And generally we're maybe 70 to 80 minutes on the long side. And it's, basically the stuff that I've done over the years, training for Ironman or training for these epic European events. I mean, if you do 2 of those classes a week and get out on the weekend, I mean, you are very fit. I mean, you really are. It's not a question of, a mistake that so many triathletes made and continue to make is they measure their fitness by how much training they're doing. I must be fit because I'm training all these hours, and as opposed to having objective quantitative benchmarks. Well, you're not. You're training all these hours, but your numbers haven't changed. So if it's a how many hours can I train contest, then you're fine. But I think all of us doing this, no matter what our level or what our age, when you're putting this much time and effort into something, you really want to see yourself improve. It's very satisfying, no matter what your level is, to see yourself get better. There's a famous politician that said, Tip O'Neill in the 80s, he said, all politics is local. Well, all riding is local too. When you're out there with your group, you want to be raising in the pecking order of your group. So anyway, I think purposeful training, measured, varied, interesting, fun, makes you stronger and better, and will prepare you for any challenge that you might do this summer or this fall, be it the MDC or L'Alpe d'Huez or Stelvio.
You'll be ready.
Yeah.
So this is for you, Chris. Chris mentioned, this is from Andy, how important the mental side of things are. We train so structured for our riding and running, but can you apply any type of structure to training for the mental aspect of endurance sports?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It is a good question. Yeah.
They're really tied together, the mental and physical. I think breaking them apart, it's hard to do. Some people say, oh, it's 80% mental, 20%. Well, where does the 80% stop and the 20% begin? And they're just so intertwined that you really, I don't think you can break them apart. And what I think is, you train, the mental side with the physical side of what you're doing, and that's where if you separate it, you really aren't necessarily, what I think, building somebody who's going to be truly prepared when that crucial time comes in an event. And that mental sort of grit, fortitude, all that comes from the training and everything that you're doing along the way, and also the events that you're doing along the way. And then the recall of it, and the truth is, we all lose many more times than we win. We all have many failures, or we fail many times more, but that's where we learn the most. It's in the losses, it's in the fails where the greatest knowledge comes from. And sitting with the coach and doing that recall and looking at what led to that, that's where we learn. And I heard a coach said, look, there's, we all fail, but that doesn't make us failures. It's the failure is to not try. And so I think that's important, is to realize that, it's in those fails that we've got the greatest knowledge to gain.
So this is from Dennis. Michael, can you talk about bike handling and tactics, especially in a group setting? How do you improve performance in terms of bike handling?
Boy, some of these questions, Bob, I learned bike handling, and Chris can appreciate that. My first time riding in a group was in Madrid, Spain, with professional cyclists, and I was using D.H. Scott handlebars. And,
in a group?
But Chris, that was before they knew to hate triathletes. They didn't know what I was.
Yeah. So, they didn't even know what a triathlete was. Then they knew to hate you.
I was referred to as the Yankee, and but that was watch and learn. It wasn't like they were doing a clinic for me. It was kind of, they were bearing with me initially, and then I kind of became one of the group. But and it was just watch and learn, and so I became a very keen student of watching everything around me. Because the other thing is, if I got dropped, they weren't going to wait for me.
No.
So a funny little, I do paceline clinics and group riding clinics here in the Bay Area also. And because it's amazing how many people ride bikes and they go out with groups, but they've never really been schooled on, how to integrate into a group such that the sum is greater than the individual parts. And again, Chris, you'll probably laugh at me, but the first time we did a very fast pace line, with single file pace line, nail it. I was always the last guy, but when I came through, I was determined to not see any diminution of pace. And so I just crushed it, and I knew that I'd maintain the pace of the group, and I drifted to the back and kind of slid over behind the pace line, and then realized my mistake of not having accelerated before that last rider went by. So I watched them ride into the distance, never to be seen again that day, except for the last place guy who kind of looked over his shoulder, saw me, just shook his head. And so I've learned a lot since that time. And, I think it's part of the fun of cycling is, being with a group and, being able to integrate riders of different abilities, being able to go at speeds you wouldn't otherwise be able to do, feeling that you're a cog part of a bigger engine. That's exhilarating, and you don't get that with many other sports. So anyway, as you can tell, I love cycling and I love the art of riding. And forgive me.
The art of riding fast.
Pardon me?
And the art of riding fast.
Yeah. So now it's just each year trying not to lose too much, but having fun doing it.
Enjoyed chatting with you guys. Lada's on, so I'm guessing our time's up.
Thank you, everyone. This was hugely entertaining. We learned a lot of the old days. It was really, really fun. I like where it went. I like the idea of the M2 team and the Chris Carmichael team on $1 Million Challenge this year. That'll be fun to watch.
Who gets the most? I like it.
Is this the year we need everybody to step up? Our community that we serve is going to need our help more than ever, and a lot of our fundraising efforts are behind the curveball at this point. So excited about that possibility. So thank you, everybody. We have a scheduling conflict, so we're off next Thursday. So there will be no CAF Bike Talk next Thursday, but the following week we will have 2 events. On May 5th, Cinco de Mayo at 4 p.m. We'll have our virtual grant night presentation. It's going to be a fabulous event. We've got some surprise visits by pro athletes and celebrities, and we're going to celebrate our 2020 Heroes of Sports. So it's going to be a very inspiring, motivating, fun event. So tune into that. And then on May 7th, we will have our next Bike Talk. We'll have 2 Paralympian cyclists on, and we'll have Chris from Roaring Mouse Bikes, our bike sponsor, and we'll talk a lot about what's new in cycling and gravel bikes and what's happening in the cycling world, what equipment we should be investing in now. And as we wrap up, I know a lot of us are missing hugging, so we're going to send a big CAF hug to our community. This is a little video we made, and it's our staff in San Diego sending a big hug to everyone. So thank you for tuning in. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Lotta.
Thank you, everybody. Very enjoyable. Thank you.
So much fun.
We know this is a difficult time,
We're all physically separated from our friends, family, coaches, and teammates.
But that doesn't mean we're alone. As part of our CAF family,
We want to send you a great big virtual hug. We're still here for you.
we're in this together.
So stay safe, stay healthy,
stay active.
stay inside, and together,
We will power through.
you got this. See you on the other side.
Yay.
All right. See everyone in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, you guys. Great to catch up.
Yeah,
Thank you, Bob.
good chatting, Bob.
Always a
Michael.
Bob, nice to meet you, Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you,
pleasure.
Michael.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.